Fantastic. So we're just giving it a minute there to allow for everyone to move into the room. So good afternoon and welcome to the Governors for Schools conference, and specifically this session on mentally healthy schools, a whole school approach. My name is Matt Long. I'm the Charity Development and Projects Manager here at Governors for Schools, as well as Chair of Matt Primary School in Croydon. Hopefully many of you have been following our Wellbeing Governors campaign over the past year. Whilst that may have come to an end, we are committed to maintaining both the relevance of our resources as well as our focus on promoting a culture within governance of putting mental health and well-being at the heart of school boards. To that end, with our expo panel, we will be exploring the importance of mental health and well-being being a prime consideration across all aspects of a school, and the role governors can and should be playing in creating mentally healthy schools. Before I introduce our panel, I have a few housekeeping points to cover. So closed captions are available. You just need to turn them on within your own browser, as it were. Speakers have been invited to share a short verbal description of themselves. I will do so now for myself. I am a white Zimbabwean male in his mid-30s with a shaved head and beard, wearing glasses, and with a white and grey background. Please enter any questions you have in the Q&A panel. We've disabled the chat function as it does sometimes mess with audio assist technology. If you do happen to be disconnected from Zoom, please just rejoin through the same link. The session is being recorded, and links to the video as well as the slides will be shared in a follow-up email, hopefully tomorrow, potentially the day after. We'll also include in that email links to, as I said, the slides, but certainly further resources and contact details for all of our guest speakers. Please continue to follow the conference and like and share our content, and make use of the hashtag GfS Conference 21. And there'll be a very short survey at the end of the session, which we would appreciate you filling out. Now, to introduce our panelists for today, we are thrilled to be joined by three fantastic guest speakers, all of whom are actually veterans of various wellbeing governance webinars, and they'll be sharing their experience and perspectives on different facets of wellbeing in schools. Firstly, Matthew Audley is lead trainer at the children's mental health charity Place2Be, and he has UK-wide responsibility for the quality assurance of training delivery. He currently leads on the design, delivery, and supervision of Place2Be's cutting-edge Place to Think service. Andy Mellor is the school's advisory service national director of wellbeing and has over 30 years experience of teaching and leading in the state education system. Andy is a board member for the Blackpool Opportunity Area and the Blackpool School Improvement Board, and a former national president of the NAHT. David Taylor is the primary PE and school sport officer for Active Sussex, a former coach and PE teacher. David leads on supporting Sussex primary schools receiving the PE and sport premium initiatives, programs, and local offers that develop PE, sport, and physical activity within primary education. Our thanks to them for being with us today. Now I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Matthew Audley.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for inviting me, and it's for inviting Place2Be. It's a real pleasure to be presenting here again. Just for the benefit of those who can't see me, I'm a young man in my very early 60s. I've got a almost white beard and a very short hair, and I'm set in a sort of a tambour background, an unusual tambour background, because I love this sort of antique setting. That's me in my setting. I'm going to talk about what it is, what makes up a mentally healthy school from our perspective at Place2Be, thinking very much in terms of psychological ideas and the experience that we've brought to working with schools throughout the UK over the last 26, 27 years that we've been in situ. I'm not going to necessarily, I've been asked to think about some particular questions that are really helpful. And I've been quite systematic in answering these questions, but I'm kind of answering these questions by offering more thoughts for you and more questions, I hope, for you to take away with you. So I'm hoping that you find those helpful. Can you move the slide on, please, Ollie? First question is, from a pupil perspective, what is a mentally healthy school and what role can you play in achieving this? If you move the slide on again, please, Ollie. I think the most important thing that we've learned and that I've learned in my experience is that learning needs always to be with the relational held in mind, and it's built on attachment theory, and that starts with leadership. And teachers really need to be aware of their roles as attachment theorists would say, as a secure base for children in the school. I think there's been too much emphasis in recent years on the cognitive for helping children to think about how to think themselves out of situations. We need to be mindful of the relational context in which they are living and working. Teachers therefore need to be role models for relationship building and self-regulation. I think children pick up the cue not so much from what we say, but how we say it. And it's not only therefore how we behave when we're managing behavior, but also how we are looking after our own well-being and how we are self-regulating ourselves. I think children pick this up. And if we're not healthy in how we function, how we relate, they are prone to take the lead from us as well. So children, I think, learn best when they feel secure. And where they struggle to learn, relationships have broken down somewhere, whether it's at home or at school, and that's impacting their confidence and their capacity, above all, to relate. Attachment theorists like to use the phrase, not so much attention seeking. We use that phrase a lot, I think, in educational contexts about children that are constantly seeking attention, but I think they are attachment seeking. They are seeking a different kind of relationship, and we need to be mindful of that, especially at this time of insecurity and rapid, unpredictable change. So we need to be aware of how we as teachers in any context are being a secure base for children, the person that they can go back to. And we need to think about how we can enable safe havens in the school, somewhere where the classroom can be a home away from home. I know that's easier said than done in primaries and secondaries, but in secondaries, we need to be aware of safe spaces, how we can make safe spaces for children and for staff. I think it all boils down to living authentic school values. I mean, in the number of schools I've worked with over the years where senior leaders have not really been clear about what their values are, and they say that their children aren't either, and they don't necessarily talk to those values. And I think it's really important that those values are reviewed and renewed on a regular basis so that children understand what those values and feel that they are part of their life. That way they feel more respected. So I think your part in creating the vision for the school is only credible if you're playing an active part in how you enter into school, how you function in the relational exchange of being a governor. Can you move the slide on, please, Ollie? We have developed over the past year the Mental Health Champions Foundation program, which is an online program and has been delivered to over 50,000 staff throughout the UK, which is an informative enabling program on different aspects of children's mental health, which also helps them to think about their own well-being whilst they're exchanging ideas about their practice. I think this is a priority, this understanding children's mental health. And it's been developed in response to overwhelming need and I think is critical going forward. My tips for you are be an active role model, be aware of how as a governor you are as a role model, because that has an impact in terms of how others attach and build their working relationships with you. So build relationships in your school. Be aware of how you relate and your impact. I think all these things can have quite a significant impact. Next slide, please. What should be the pupil mental health and wellbeing priorities for schools for the coming year was my second question. And what are the challenges and the opportunities? If you move on to the next slide, please. The psychiatrist and pediatrician Donald Winnicott, who used to work in the 50s and 60s and 70s, spoke of a concept called transitional space, which is all about helping children to think about what is internal, make itself, find itself externally in the world. How do they go about communicating it? A child, for example, who's got a security blanket, an infant, is dealing with their anxiety of letting go of mother. And that's the way they use the security blanket as a way of communicating about their feelings. At this time, given all the insecurity that we're all facing, I think settling in is a priority right now. What was once taken for granted is no longer true. And it's going to take some time, probably several years, before children and parents and staff can trust in continuity again. Right now, we're all functioning a bit like we're ambivalently attached. That means our baseline thought about relationships is, can I trust? I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I mean, the government, I think, is behaving like this at the moment, constantly changing its approach to this or that over vaccination passports recently, for example. For many children, the pandemic has been a kind of significant chunk out of their years today, and that's dented their confidence in continuity. And I think that settling agenda is really important. So how we cope with change needs to be an explicit activity in the school context, how we think about that together. What have we lost out on? What do we need to let go of? This is the transitional space that we need to think about. And that needs to start with senior management and then cascade down through staff and to children. The new normal, I don't think, is not the old normal. The more we move away from this idea that we don't need to go back, but we're arriving at a new place, is critical. Our challenge, therefore, I think in this context, is not to press too hard, too soon. Our opportunity, and this is another concept that Donald Winnicott introduced to us, which is about being a good enough. He spoke of good enough mothers who, when in the kind of early years of the child's life, help enable a supportive, loving relationship. And he said that that mothers only have to be good enough 30% of the time, not 100% of the time. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to do enough of it. If we feel that we have to achieve all of the time, I think that places pressure on us to be too good and to feel that we can never achieve what we've set out to do, and disables us and disables leadership and takes our focus away from learning from situations that don't go the way that we've planned. If you could move on, please, Ollie. So make use of the idea of good enough is one of my tips for you in this context. And have a think also about, what does a good enough school look and feel like? That's a question I ask of head teachers all the time. So draw back and help them to think about that. If you could move on again, please, Ollie. My third question, how should schools balance mental health and well-being with the potential need to catch up? If you move on again, lovely, thanks. Catch up from what is my kind of answer to that? From all the stress that we've been under and the potential need to catch up. We need to focus on the psychological first of all. There's a song by the Editors where the front line words are, it breaks when you don't force it. So I'm thinking, what's the hurry? We're in a hurry enough as it is. Children are beginning feeling isolated, frustrated, estranged, and unsocialized. And school is the primary source of the social for children. That's why in their minds, they come to school. So we need to build the social again, how they settle in, how they agree, how they disagree, how they get to understand, how they best learn, and how they best collaborate with one another. You know, academic achievement is not in opposition to well-being, but dependent on it. And the very fact that we've framed a question in opposition implies that you have to sacrifice children's well-being in order for them to catch up. Let's catch up psychologically first, and the staff, not just the children. So we need to build the social again. We need to create space where we can engender thinking, space for thinking. During the last year, Place2Be has offered place to think sessions throughout the UK. These are 90-minute sessions for small groups of staff, often from different schools, to help them to reflect on the priorities that are currently troubling them, given the experience in role. That's from head teachers down to HLTAs. There's an opportunity here to process and make sense of what is going on for us. And I think it's so important in the counselling profession. You have to have at least an hour's supervision every month. I don't see that in the education profession. I think we need a lot more of that. If not, unprocessed experience compromises our capacity to learn and teach. If staff don't have this time, it filters into their private lives and impairs their ability to function and to think straight about very mundane activities. The number of head teachers I worked with in the past year where their stress levels have seriously impacted on their family relationships and even interrupted their dreams. I think this is a real concern. So we need to create reflective spaces. This is our opportunity to generate increased awareness of our relationships between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and increase our capacity to self-regulate. And how we manage our stress will help us to offer greater insight into what lies behind children's behavior. So we need to integrate the right kind of language that encourages self-awareness and self-reflection in both our staff teams and in children. If you move it on, Ollie, please. So listen to the support needs of your head teacher is my tip in this respect. Take your time with them. I spoke to a head teacher recently, a couple of days ago, and they said, questions I want you want to ask me are, what do you need and how can I help? Keep it simple. If you move the slide on, please. My final question, how do we integrate pupil and staff mental health and well-being in a whole school approach? We need to use a systemic approach. If you move the slide on, please. Place2Be have always taken a systemic approach in helping to think about supporting school staff, school leadership, and the carers and parents in and around the work that we do with children. And it's so critical that I think when thinking about mental health and well-being in your schools, that you offer that kind of approach and engender that kind of approach. If you're offering counselling support for children, for example, think of your school provision as a universal and targeted CAMS service, a childhood and adolescent mental health service. And teachers need to know what service they might be referring to and what kind of feedback they're going to receive at the same time. We're part of a DFE-backed initiative, which follows on from the Green Paper back in 2018, which is about helping to skill up senior mental health leads in developing their mental health strategy. I think this is a critical program, and it follows on the back of our Mental Health Champions program, which is helping school leaders develop their mental health strategy. As part of this, we've developed a self-assessment tool to help school leaders and their staff to identify areas of priority. This encourages a really drilled down sort of systematic approach, but this needs to be done in a collaborative way, you know, not just with one senior leader, but a whole team around them. If you move the slide on, please. So, questions for you to ask in this respect. Who is your school's mental health lead? Who are they working with in the school? Make sure they have a team around them and they're not working alone. And also identify a mental health governor who can play an active part in this process, someone who has the appropriate experience and motivation to be involved. Where this has worked in schools, I think it's been really helpful. If you move on to the final slide now, please. Just some final tips for you whilst I've been whistle stopping through my ideas. That's why I've got these slides for you, so you can have a think back on them. Just to kind of reiterate, do model supportive, good enough attachment in your working relationships. I think that's critical. And be aware of what some psychologists are calling the audit culture mentality. We become a bit like a child that's so geared to perform in the answer to the question that becomes afraid to reflect on its needs while it is performing. And I think that you know, with that kind of mentality, we get too nervous, too anxious about being perfect, rather than taking our time to process and reflect on some very difficult experiences in the educational context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. That was fascinating and very useful, certainly for me. And if I could now hand over to our second speaker, Andy Mellor. Thank you,
Thanks,
Andy.
Matt. Thanks, and good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andy Meller, and I'm the National Wellbeing Director for Schools Advisory Service. And one day a week, I'm the strategic lead for the Carnegie Centre of Excellence for Mental Health in Schools at Leeds Beckett University. I'm white, mid-50s, Lancastrian, and have very short hair, although my wife would probably say bald. The aim of this presentation is to support governors to be able to work with senior leaders to embed a culture of wellbeing, which proactively supports strong mental health for the school community that they serve. It serves to help generate an understanding of mental health and wellbeing and how you might support and challenge the leadership team. If you could just flip over to the next slide, please, Ollie. So, I just progress my notes, thank you. So, what is wellbeing? What is mental ill health? Is there a common definition for wellbeing at your school that everybody understands? And it's really important as a starting point that we understand this, because there are so many definitions of wellbeing and mental health. Does the definition apply to everybody in your school? Or even in your community as a wider community? And what does it mean to be a mentally healthy school? All of these are questions which schools need to address, and we need to start by understanding what we mean by well-being. And as you'll see on the slide, this is my personal definition of well-being as I believe it applies to school, because if we agree on this definition, it holds well-being as an aspiration for all, and for all in a personal sense as well as a professional sense. And I really don't think you can separate the two. You'll know of situations yourself where maybe you've been going to work and you've not been well with your personal well-being, and it does have an impact on professional well-being as well. So one of the things I was really quite acutely aware of as a head teacher was to try not to separate personal and professional well-being, because I know if I look after the personal well-being of my staff, then they're more likely to be better in their professional life and have good professional well-being as well. So this is all about being the very best version of yourselves. And I don't think that that definition would vary when it comes to the pupils either. I think we want our children in a really strong, mentally and physically healthy place where they can thrive and flourish and be the best version of themselves. Now, the four key pillars that underpin well-being for everybody are sufficiency of sleep, relaxation, exercise, and nutrition. And there's an awful lot I could say on all of these, but suffice it to say that all of them affect our ability to be the best that we can be, professionally, personally, physically, and mentally. And I include relaxation within all of that, because you will know about how stressful the job is in schools, particularly at the moment, with the return to schools very recently, and not quite knowing what the relaxation of the measures that we've had in place would have on school. And what that does is in many cases, lots of our staff in school are constantly drawing on cortisol, the stress hormone, which is great to be used in bursts, but actually is not great to be used day after day, week after week. And so what relaxation can do is actually dial down on the cortisol and return us to normal levels of cortisol. So we need to be ensuring that our whole school community, under this definition, recognise the importance of these 4 pillars. And I think what we've had in the past 20, 25 years, we've had a fairly machoistic approach to education in that, you know, it's the whatever it takes mantra. I love Matthew's good enough definition. We've had a mantra of whatever it takes in education over the last 25 years. And I think there's a legacy of mental ill health that comes from that. And this applies to, you know, to students as well. I was delivering a session last week with 120 year 5 and year 6 children in East Manchester on these aspects, these 4 pillars of wellbeing. And the programme was built to support staff, pupils and parents. Okay, Ollie, could you just flip the slide for me, please? So why wellbeing? Because quite simply, when it comes to sleep, we're now getting an average of an hour less sleep as a population than we were 40 years ago. We're eating more processed foods and saturated fats than we've ever done. We're spending less time relaxing and more time working than ever before. And on average, we're spending less time per person exercising, and that's even at a basic level. The impact of this is an increase in stress-related illness, and we know how stressful a school environment can be. Obesity, chronic heart problems, and there is one Manchester GP who is now resisting the wish of his patients to prescribe tablets for everyday conditions, and instead he's prescribing lifestyle changes in terms of sleep, exercise, nutrition and relaxation. So well-being is really, really important. This worrying picture means that as individuals, in general terms, our well-being is suffering. Only when we are well can we be the best version of ourselves. And we've become so reliant on the NHS and medication that we've almost abdicated responsibility for the part that we can play in our own health and well-being. So when somebody says, what are you doing for my well-being? There needs to be a gentle pushback in terms of what are you doing for your own well-being and taking responsibility for their own well-being. Apart from wanting to be well and healthy for ourselves, we enter into a contract of employment as staff working in a school to offer our services in return for remuneration, and we should have pride in developing on our contractual obligations to the best of our abilities, and being well allows us to do that. Good well-being leads to fulfillment and a sense of job satisfaction, and this is key at a time when vast numbers of teachers are leaving the profession. It's really key for the teaching profession to model good well-being and self-care, because so many children won't get to understand exactly what well-being is and looks like without it being modeled for them. There's now considerable research evidence from a number of sources that shows that staff with good well-being leads to better pupil well-being and better academic outcomes. And I've often heard, as Matthew was saying, schools needing to make a choice between well-being or standards, but it doesn't have to be a binary choice. At the school where I was head in Blackpool, we built a well-being approach to teaching and learning, and without focusing on data, our results for all children soared, especially those children from poorer backgrounds. It saw us go in just over 2 years from requires improvement to outstanding. So it doesn't have to be a binary choice. Next slide, please, Ollie. So quite often people say, well, why do we need well-being in schools? And I think it's widely accepted that you can't have good pupil well-being without good staff well-being and vice versa. And the two are completely interlinked and interdependent. We've had 18 months of loss of autonomy and control, and it's time to give this back to staff and students. And we know that there is a track record of this sort of approach having a huge impact on standards. And as I say, it's something that we majored on when we took the school from requires improvement to outstanding. We also know that if you're in a better place mentally and physically, you take more advantage of the opportunities that life throws your way. And the same is the case for learning. Happier, more mentally and physically healthy staff and pupils equals better outcomes. We also know that poverty is equated with poor well-being. If we improve well-being for learners from disadvantaged backgrounds, then we start to remove some of their barriers to learning. Improved learning equals improved outcomes and a real chance of social mobility. Unless we stop the generational cycle of poverty, poor well-being and poor outcomes, the cycle merely just repeats itself. Schools are great places for children to learn better well-being, to break the cycle, and to be able to teach their own children about well-being, as well as it rubbing off on their own parents at home. Working with parents is critical to parents' understanding and being able to support well-being strategies adopted by schools. This is why at SAS we've improved and continue to improve our range of services to schools that come free with a policy, and is why we're undergoing more training to deliver this to all of the 4,000 schools that we have policies with. Next slide, please, Matt. So I want to talk a little bit about the spectrum of mental health in schools. And I think a whole school approach to mental health and well-being has to incorporate all aspects of mental health support and provision. And the 0 to -10 side, so the left-hand side of that, is what schools have been traditionally very good at, and it involves knowing that a pupil needs support and referral for specialist support such as CAMS. What we've been less good at is the proactive awareness and development of strong mental health, and we need both approaches, but we really do need to dial up on the 0 to +10 aspect of this, and I know that Place2Be do some great work with that as well. The same could be argued about staff mental health and well-being. We've been better at supporting staff with referrals to occupational health when things have gone wrong, but not as good at supporting staff with positive mental health practice and strategies to prevent mental health or its exacerbation. At the same time, the pressures of the job, the workload, expectations and accountability continue to rise. Now with the expectation that learning loss from COVID is going to have to be made up by staff in schools as well. Pupils have never been under as much pressure to achieve, to conform with peer pressure and social media, and to catch up, often being described as a lost generation. If there was ever a need for a whole school mental health and wellbeing strategy, it's now. I can't remember in 33 years in the profession the coming together of so many factors, and in many ways, it's a perfect storm. Next slide, please, Ollie. Now, I just wanted to draw your attention to the Education Staff Wellbeing Charter, which has been put together with DfE and a number of other agencies. And it's a useful starting point as it covers basic organisational responsibilities, but also critically the responsibility of all individual staff for their own wellbeing. But I must stress, it's only a conversation starter. It inevitably covers workload and refers to the workload reduction toolkit, but also talks about communication and decision making and giving staff a stake in this. It also refers to flexible working patterns that the DfE can advise on and what is available to staff. But encouragingly, it also recognises school leader mental health and wellbeing and the need to measure wellbeing and the role that CPD plays in mental health and wellbeing. And I wanted to really underline that role of senior leader mental health, because in many ways, as the head teacher, you are very dependent on a really supportive chair of governors to be able to go to in terms of having a conversation about your own mental health and well-being. However, in terms of workload from the charter, and I'll refer you to pages 3 to 7 on the charter, it talks about who's doing what within the charter. And it says basically that the DfE will ensure that the charter is understood and it will be fed through to schools. Ofsted will inspect wellbeing, and they've got 3 bullet points within the charter. But schools end up with 11 bullet points to support mental health and wellbeing. And I'm really quite concerned that the document suggests that wellbeing is a school or school leader inspired issue, rather than the workload that we know emanates from the DfE and Ofsted. And my advice would be to work on wellbeing, but don't make it solely your issue. DfE and Ofsted can do more to dial down their expectations on schools. My penultimate slide now, please, Ollie. So the answer to these questions that you can see in front of you there will help to evaluate your mentally healthy school strategy. The answers will be specific responses to your situation, and therefore the plan will need to be specific to your school. As an organisation, we at SAS can help to support you with this via one of our policies, and we've helped to write, deliver and train staff in supporting the development of a mentally healthy school. But it must be a whole school initiative. Governors have a critical role in the development and oversight of a whole school wellbeing culture that supports all. However you go about your work as a board or as a wellbeing governor, you need to know that the wellbeing strategy drawn up by the school leadership team is built on the needs of your school community, that you have some clear achievable goals which can be measured to demonstrate success, and it's reviewed and evaluated, developed and tweaked to meet the changing needs that you'll face over time. And my final slide. So this final slide sums up what wellbeing and an evolving responsive approach to wellbeing should look like. It isn't going to be something that can be put on a 3-year improvement plan to be ticked off as done in 3 years' time. It needs to be a consistent strand that flexes and responds to wellbeing needs that the school is going to meet on its journey. I'd see it as a golden thread, which epitomises your approach as to this is the way we do things here. I do hope the presentation has been useful in stimulating some thought about how you might go about supporting a strategy and ethos that promotes positive mental health and well-being. As Matthew said earlier, good enough is where we should be recalibrating and away from whatever it takes. If you'd like to know more and find out how we can support you, please do contact me via the details on that slide. And back to you, Matt.
Thank you so much, Andy. An awful lot to take away there. I would just like to remind everyone, we will have some Q&A at the end, so please do submit any questions you have, and we will endeavour to get to them if we have time. I would also remind you that we will indeed be sharing slides. There'll be a link in the email we send you that will take you to our website. We will be able to download them once the upload is complete. Now, our final speaker, David Taylor. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Matt. My name is David Taylor. And as Matt said earlier, I'm the primary PE and school sport officer at Active Sussex. I'm a white British male in my mid-30s, and I have short dark hair. And today I'm going to be discussing the role that physical activity can play in creating a mentally healthy school. Okay, can we go on to the next slide, please, Ollie? Thank you. So the 3 areas that I'm going to be focusing on in this presentation are the relationship between physical activity and mental health, what impact the pandemic COVID has had on physical activity levels and attitudes amongst children and young people, and finally, how we can use activity to put well-being at the heart of education and school life. Next slide, please, Ollie. So earlier this year, I was lucky enough to attend a conference with Dr. Jenny Harries, who I imagine most of you will now know and recognise from her spells on TV over the pandemic. And she opened up her delivery with the quote that's on the screen there, that physical activity is the single most important thing to do to improve your mental health, mental and physical health. So in a slide that almost does my presentation for me, when someone like Dr. Jenny Harries says that, then you know, that's good enough for me. But obviously we can embellish slightly on that. But it just goes to show the importance that physical activity in a time like the pandemic, when there's been obviously so much emphasis on medicine, she's brought it back to just saying how physical activity is the single most important thing, and not just for physical health, but for your mental health too. And I think perhaps anecdotally we can think back to our own time, perhaps during the first lockdown, when we were allowed out to exercise perhaps once a day, and just how much better it made us feel during that activity and after that activity when we got back in as well. Yeah, there is an inextricable link between the two. Next slide, please, Ollie. So to look into that a little bit further, the 2019 report from the UK's Chief Medical Officers reviewed research in that area and concluded that being physical active or physical activity in general is associated with better physiological, psychological, and psychosocial health among children and young people. They used this guidance to produce a set of physical activity guidelines for children and young people. And the graphic on the screen outlines 8 different ways that just being active can develop you and support your health in general. So it builds confidence and social skills. It develops your coordination. It improves concentration and learning. It strengthens your muscles and your bones. It improves your health and fitness. It helps you maintain a healthy weight. It improves your sleep. And I mean, all of those things obviously will make you feel happy, but yeah, links directly to making you feel good. And I think obviously there is that physical and mental health, which you've already touched on, but that psychosocial health shouldn't be missed as well. Having a socially healthy school is also going to directly lead to pupils having a better experience, being happier. And so being active directly relates to being happier and healthier mentally and physically. It relates to having improved schools, communities, and therefore I mean, to summarize, being active will make stronger students within your school. Next slide, please, Ollie. So moving on to the second part of this presentation, I'm going to look at physical activity levels. And to do this, we're going to look at a what's called the Active Live survey, which has been conducted for the last 4 years, I believe now, nationally for children and young people. It's quite a large scale study. The Chief Medical Officer's guidelines that I mentioned before, they state that children and young people, to achieve those benefits that were listed on the last slide, should be active for an average of at least 60 minutes per day. And when I say active, it's moderate to vigorous activity. So that's got to be activity that makes you feel hotter, makes you breathe faster. It's probably the simplest way of putting it. And 30 minutes of the 60 minutes should now come within the school day. Throughout 2018-19 academic year, so pre-pandemic, only 48% of children and young people were meeting those recommendations. So there's clearly room for this area to be improved. Next slide, please, Ollie. So during the pandemic, unfortunately, those figures got worse. 48% of children and young people achieving the 60 active minutes decreased to 44.9%. And we also saw an increase of children and young people who are at the bottom end doing less than 30 minutes a day, an increase of 2.4%. So during the pandemic, we had over 30% of our children doing less than 30 minutes of physical activity per day on average. We also did see, however, that the types of activity that children and people participated in changed, which, if you think about it, there were no sports clubs, there's no leisure facilities open, so that is expected. But we did see increases in young people walking, cycling, and taking part in fitness sessions, mostly virtual. Next slide, please, Ollie. We also saw during this time, or just back one more, yeah. So in the 3 years previous to the pandemic, attitudes had remained unchanged. So when I mention attitudes, it's individuals' perception on how competent they are, how much they understand why and how they should be physical active, their enjoyment, confidence, and knowledge around physical activity. So yeah, those attitudes have remained unchanged for the previous 3 years. But in that summer term, when the survey began again for pupils as they returned to school, there was a noticeable drop in the amount of positive attitudes during this survey. And as a consequence, the survey has found that there is links between the amount of positive attitudes and how individual and community development on how pupils are active and on how pupils are happy. So again, that direct link between positive attitudes, being active, and mental health. Next slide, please, Ollie. So we're going to finish there by looking, I'm going to finish on the last few slides by looking at how and why physical activity and wellbeing should be really at the heart of the school ethos. So if you just look specifically within education, the benefits that are associated and directly linked with physical activity are enhanced educational attainment, improved concentration and behaviour. Pupils are more resilient when they are active, and going back to that social effects as well, they have an improved social cohesion. So all of which contribute to a healthier and happier school. Next slide, please, Ollie. Now, there are already 3 items in place to support and encourage the development of this area in schools. So the government continues to fund the primary PE and sport premium. It was doubled a few years ago. An average school will now receive £18,000 across an academic year to develop their PE, their school sport, and their physical activity provision. And so you know the financial situation of the government, that has continued again for the current academic year. So they're still really keen to develop this area and to make pupils more active. The first key indicator of that premium is to increase the amount of pupils achieving 30 minutes of physical activity in school every day. The new Ofsted inspection framework has a greater focus on personal development of pupils and gives greater recognition to schools during an Ofsted inspection. And as part of that, their schools are required to generate the understanding amongst pupils of the link between physical activity and mental health, which again links to the third point on that slide, the new compulsory RSHE curriculum, again, which teaches pupils about that link between physical and mental well-being. And obviously that's not actually, so it's not just about getting them to be more active, it's getting them to understand why they need to be more active and how much activity they need to take part in as well, and how that does link with their mental well-being. Next slide, please, Ollie. So there are a few sort of recommended ways in which schools, oh, can you just go back to one, can play sort of a pivotal role in helping to develop this area. So the first one is raising the awareness of the importance of regular physical activity, which obviously we've just been mentioned, but it's important, it's that knowledge and understanding as well as the actual participation in activity that's important. Secondly, by increasing children's exposure to fun and varied activities, and this is exactly where that PE and sport premium can come in to support this. This could be within PE lessons, this could be within extracurricular clubs, before school, after school, and this could also be in play times as well. So 3 obvious opportunities to expose pupils there. And finally, by creating more active environments so that pupils find it easier to simply move more during the day. And some examples of that could be active travel to and from school is the way of making that easier for parents and pupils to travel in on their bike or by walking in. Can you encourage pupils, like you see on the picture there, to use the stairs more rather than use lifts, or ways of using the stairs perhaps when they need to, so to develop their times table linked in with what they're learning at school. And finally, I've mentioned active lessons, because it's important we don't add anything onto teachers' workloads. This can be just, it's not adding extra, it's just a different way of doing it. So when you're teaching maths lessons, can you teach a maths lesson in an active way? And there are plenty of resources and support and some great initiatives out there which can support that, again, which that PE and sport premium can be used to develop at your school. Next slide, please, Ollie. Can you just go back one? So I've just listed really quickly some opportunities to encourage physical activity that schools can implement throughout their school day. So as I've just mentioned, active travel. Can we build on that motivation that pupils have from the pandemic to cycle more and to walk more by developing active travel to and from our school? Can we put on more extracurricular clubs targeted towards our less active pupils? Can we make sure that PE lessons are high quality? Can we develop our teachers to ensure that? Because we know that the initial teacher training that most teachers receive is not adequate in this area. Can we put in blast into our more sedentary sessions of activity? There is lots of free video resources that that students can follow just to add a 5-minute blast to a lesson where they may be sitting down most of the time. Can we make our maths and English lessons active lessons? Can they go outside? Can they move around to find numbers and to find the questions and answer them? Can our playtimes become more active? And finally, that school environment, and not just in terms of classroom space and hallways and things like that, but our actual teaching staff, is it acceptable for them to have active lessons, which are probably going to be more disruptive perhaps initially and more noisy initially, but is that acceptable for them to enable people to take part in active lessons at their school? Final slide. So yeah, that was really quite a bit of a whistle-stop tour of this area, but I have put my details on there should you want to know any more. There's some fantastic resources on this area on the Governors for Schools website. I did a webinar with them earlier this year on specifically on the PE and Sport Premium, the role that governors can play in that. So please feel free to go back and have a look at them as well. Thank you, Matt. That's all from me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. That was very comprehensive. And as David mentioned, we've had the benefit of his and lots of other people's insights and expertise on all manner of wellbeing issues in schools. So please do check back on those wellbeing either webinars or written materials. So we're moving into the Q&A portion of the session. And a quick one for David, just whilst I've got you. Primary Sport Premium, are maintained nurseries included in this?
No, it's just for so primary school, so early years.
Yeah.
The reception class, but no younger.
Got you. Fantastic. And then one I believe was for Andy from Charlotte. Have any of these suggestions come from other sectors who are facing similar issues, such as higher education or the NHS? I guess when it comes to staff well-being.
I've basically taken them from my own experience of primary and secondary, but I would imagine that a lot of the same sort of stressors exist in higher education, just in a slightly different area. I'm presuming that's what the question was about.
Yeah, no, I assume it was trying to see if perhaps there was some inference from other organizations, or what you're talking about was maybe based on experience or research outside of the schooling environment.
I think one of the things that we've realised over the last 18 months is that we rely very heavily on the NHS, and I think it's I think we need to, as I said in my presentation, take more responsibility for our own mental health and well-being, and making the right sort of choices. So that's a philosophy I think that we probably all need to embrace at some stage or other. Because the way things are at the moment in terms of the services that are under most pressure, it is mental health services, but there are a number of things that we can do as individuals to manage a lot of those issues ourselves.
Fantastic. And perhaps I'll come over to you for this, Matthew, if that's all right. The attendee asks, I've started as a mental health and wellbeing link governor this term. Fantastic news. Mm-hmm. I'm planning to meet with staff, pupils, and our Place2Be counsellor. If you were in this role, are there any issues or areas you would identify as being particularly important to report on? I'm assuming report on back to the board.
I mean, one of the I think what's really important is kind of what I alluded to earlier, is about for any kind of services that are offered within the school context, what kind of systems are there in place to help support that? You know, how does a teacher make a referral about a child to a counselling service, for example, or you know, or some such service, and how are they involved in that? What kind of thinking goes into that process? What kind of evaluation goes into that? How is that fed back? You know, how do they liaise with parents? So there's a proper understanding of the systems which are in school. Too many systems are developed on an ad hoc basis. You know, we'd like to offer this support for this child without kind of proper sort of thought and time given to it. You know, so get them to take them, support them to take their time with those kinds of processes. The systems need to be in place first of all. Fantastic. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Matthew. Coming over to David. So this question is about, I guess, the messaging around physical activity and physical health. So this person supports improving physical health, being active and eating well, but feels a lot of the messaging excludes people who are perhaps unable to do physical activity, or certainly common types of physical activity, let's say, if they have mental health problems that prohibit physical activity. And then similarly with eating well, children who are excluded might be in families who use food banks, etc. Do you have any ideas on how to make this messaging more inclusive?
Obviously, I can only really answer from a physical activity point of view. And I'd certainly say that in terms of inclusion, this area's it's developed immensely over the last few years, and it's certainly an area that that funding is going towards at the moment, and certainly that the P in Sport Premium can be used to develop. There's some great resources and support for something like the Youth Sport Trust has developed some incredible in sports. They have special inclusion schools that simply look to develop ways of making physical activity more diverse and more open to everyone, really. So I mean, if there is the messaging itself, it remains the same regardless, really. Those 60 minutes are the crucial area, but anything really, if you move more, it's better for you. So if you're only doing 1 minute, if you can do 2 minutes, that's going to be better. So I think there are the medical officer guidelines I referred to is purely for children and young people. There are a range of guidelines that are produced for different demographics. But yeah, if there's a more specific question around that, I'm happy to follow up on that afterwards.
Fantastic. And yes, please do. I guess speakers have been kind enough to come share the routes to contact them, appropriate routes to contact them. So please do get in touch to explore further if need be. I guess maybe hopefully not too long a question for you, Andy. How do we avoid patronizing staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a real danger that some of the more sort of random acts of kindness could be seen as patronizing. I can imagine going into one school where they do free tea and coffee and sticky buns on a Friday afternoon, and the staff enjoy those and then take a caseload of marking home with them over the weekend. And I think we need to look at the big picture in terms of workload, and I think if we enter into gestures, then people will quite rightly point at some of the bigger issues around well-being that we need to address. So I think an honest conversation with staff around what the issues are for well-being, and then once we've got a clear understanding of what are the things that are problems for your particular staff in your school, then we can go about setting about strategies to try and design those out if we possibly can.
Brilliant. Okay, we're about to run out of time. Quick fire round. Caroline's curious about governors with relevant skills that Matthew brought up. So very quickly, if each of you could let me know what skills and perhaps attitudes you'd like governors to have coming into the role or develop whilst in the role to address the totality of mental health and well-being. Matthew, if we can start with you.
Blimey, God. You keep it simple. You know, don't ask too many questions. Be thoughtful about the questions that you ask. You know, as that head teacher said to me recently, what was it? You know, what do you need and how can I help? Keep it simple. Create reflective thinking space between you. That really helps, I think, especially for head teachers.
Brilliant. And if I can come to you, Andy.
Yeah, there's one little tip that I would give as a takeaway, it would be look at a conversation with the head teacher and school leaders about what it is that your school's doing in that 0 to +10 space. How are we building positive well-being? How are we planning out some of the things that are eating away at the well-being of staff?
Fantastic. And finally, David.
Yeah, in terms of staff, we always like our governors just to speak to the staff, ask them what they want, ask them how they can help. And in terms of pupils, ask the pupils what do they want, not what clubs do the teachers think they want, what clubs do the pupils or what activities do the pupils want to take part in.
Fantastic. That pupil and obviously staff voice are important. Well, I would like to thank our wonderful panel for the benefit of their time and insight, as well as all of you for attending. Please do continue to support the conference as well as our campaign. I would like to draw particular attention to our session on Friday at 4 p.m, launching our new campaign, All Pupils, Every Ambition. We'll be exploring challenges and opportunities related to gaps in attainment and life outcome and what schools can do to support this. Clearly a huge well-being and mental health component there. Also, Bounce Together are delivering a session on monitoring well-being at 1:15, also on Friday. And tomorrow at 8 a.m, we have a session looking at well-being in Welsh schools. So if you have an interest in education in Cymru, please do get stuck into that. We have Sinead McBrearty from Education Support speaking there. Please also look out for our follow-up email, as I mentioned, with pertinent links and resources and details for our guest speakers. Thanks again for coming and have a wonderful evening.